All right, so welcome back to the next episode of the Inklings. And this will be a little bit more of a recap
Yeah.
episode under kind of what we've been talking through so far,
So
even according to what the short story we're going to be working on.
yeah, so to preface, I know last week we might have mentioned we were going to talk plot. However, we've been kind of struggling with the preparation for that episode, so we decided the best course of action as we continue to prepare for that discussion would be to kind of do a recap on what we've covered so far, maybe hash out some clearer details, and maybe that'll help us in that discussion of plot later down the road.
Because I know for us, like, plot kind of comes a little bit naturally,
Yeah.
especially as we've already had writing done before. Like, we've written our own stuff, or are writing, or in the midst of writing our own stuff. So some of that plot kind of comes naturally. Like, even from the first episode of world building, I was already thinking of plot everything goes around, and then as you create the character, some of that also gets hashed out. So there's a lot of interconnectivity with a lot of these things, and as you create your own stuff and as you kind of work through your own story creation, you'll find things kind of fit into place. And we'll talk kind of some of the ideas that we're having for some of ours, like for our story at least that we have. And obviously ours is very concise and it fits a certain mold because of, well, we kind of slotted ourselves into that place.
That was done on purpose.
Yes.
Again, that's maybe not typically how you would approach it, but for the sake of how we're doing this, we thought it'd be interesting.
Yeah.
So let's start with the world building. Kind of recap what we have there, just as a reminder. Yeah. So, what is the setting of this story?
So the setting of the story is the Arctic tundra, which is quite limited, I would say.
Which I guess we'll get kind of into character in a little bit. But okay, what are the tools?
So kind of some of the things that somewhat affect how the world works, at least in the story, is low gravity.
Now this is interesting because it does.
It complicates
it complicates it because it provides a unique amount of freedom, but it also limits you in other ways. So let's talk about that last thing, which is theme. What is our theme?
So the last theme we had was starting life from nothing, or the last person alive / survival.
Okay. So Arctic tundra, low gravity, and survival. So Brandon, one of the ideas we had as we were kind of exploring this is both of us have very different writing styles. And so we thought it would be kind of interesting as we approach this story to kind of utilize our different writing styles in a unique way. But also to kind of maybe not necessarily circumvent some of the holes we've forced ourselves into with this, but we're each going to tackle a different aspect of the story in a very different way. So
one of the ideas that we kind of came up with, I think, in that episode is the idea of basically having your main character and they're alone. So they're having a conversation between themselves. You have your mind and your physical body. So basically, you're in your mind. It's going to be the more whimsical floating rivers that are frozen over.
You're going to see that more low gravity aspect.
That's where we decided to implement more of the low gravity. It's all in the mental state and everything with all that entails. And Jonathan will go into it a little bit.
Yep, because that's going to be the side of the story that I'm going to be covering is the more whimsical side, which, as we've discussed, is my bread and butter.
Which, I mean, I can do whimsical.
Yeah.
That's not the problem for me. But I think it just lends itself to kind of showcasing different aspects and avenues of writing styles. So I'll be writing more based on reality and different realism things. So that's why we kind of wanted to stay within that Arctic tundra itself, because we could have made it, it could be on another planet. It could be, say, Hoth, for example, and like Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings.
Star Wars. But we decided to actually stay in like the Arctic tundra.
Yeah.
So that kind of lends itself into the character that we have,
Yes.
which I think we both decided is an Arctic fox.
Now, there's something very interesting about this Arctic fox. You want to share a little bit about?
Yeah. So one of the ideas I had, and this was off air or whatever you want to call it.
This is new. You guys don't know about this.
So as I was kind of wandering and thinking about these things after we recorded the episode, I was thinking of kind of how, like, what different features and everything that the fox or whatever our character would have. So something that Arctic foxes do in reality is they change their pelt coats depending on which season they're in. So in the winter, they would have like a snow white pelt, and in the summer, they'd be more of a muddied brown to kind of go along with the environment. I thought, what if the fox had an ashen gray pelt that did not change? Like, it didn't change with the season. And maybe there's some mental instability with that, or there's different things that have happened in the past. And obviously with the last member alive, kind of going with, okay, maybe it's part of something that happened early on in life, or something around the lines, like, for example, and I think this is maybe the idea we're going to go around, where the foxes and the family are in a den. They're huddled around the MC, so the main character that we have, and the whole family perishes except for the MC. And whether it's because of the cold or different things that happen, basically a big violent storm, something, the whole family perishes, and for some reason the pelt doesn't change anymore, and the character has to live with that. So that's part of like the backstory. And basically it's almost like we have to survive. Like, I'm an outcast, nobody wants me, I have to find a way to survive. So, and then you follow the journey of basically, and where it's going to end, we don't exactly know. No. But kind of the plot, at least we have, and obviously we haven't really talked about the plot episode yet, but it is that more of the survival kind of journey.
Yes, and that kind of leads me into the mental aspect of the story.
The other journey.
Yes. So the journey of the mind, which does lend itself towards more of the fantastical. And so I've got a bunch of ideas. None of them are, set in stone, but the one that I really like, and it goes back to that pelt color, and we talked about it a little bit off the air, is that, well, in reality, the fox's pelt would be an ashen gray. In the mind, well, how does one perceive themselves? Is it necessarily true to reality? Well, in this case, I'm going to say no. The fox would perceive themselves as with a pelt as white as snow. And as the story would continue, as you kind of reach that conclusion, that pelt would eventually change to that ashen gray as they, become more comfortable with that identity.
With their own skin.
With their own skin. Some other ideas I had, again, leaning more into that fantastical aspect of the mind as they embark on that journey, is what would kind of the how do I want to phrase it? I guess for the lack of better words, the culture that this fox would be around. How would that influence their mind? Would there be a very spiritual aspect to that? And how they see the world and how they think and process information. So there's a lot. Maybe you'll see some footnotes. I don't know. I love my footnotes.
Yeah, so like obviously we'll be delving a little bit more into the personality side and different things.
It's basically going to be Inside Out 3, so prepare yourself. No, I'm kidding. Not really.
But yeah, and then something that I kind of looked up after we did the stuff is I think I did it after the world building actually, where I wanted to utilize Inuit language, so the people that live in the Arctic tundra, and kind of use their words for a potential name for our character. So I thought of a couple of options, and I think we narrowed it down to one. And I'll just go through the options that we had and what they mean, or at least so says the internet. I even tried to look at like an Alaskan dictionary to actually literally look up some of these things. Yeah. I will say the word for polar bear probably will be used in the story itself because we will be trailing a polar bear for like scavenging as an idea because that's something that actually happens in reality. But I'll probably call it Nanook, different things like that. But anyway, so some of the names that I was thinking of, which are Kaya, which is mountain, Koda, which is friend, Mishka, little bear, Inua, moon, Takani, wolf, and I'm just going to admit the other one because I don't even know how to say it to begin with.
But it stands for Arctic fox.
Which meant, yeah, it stood for Arctic.
It's very hard to pronounce, though.
Tariniac or Tarigianac, something like that. We're not going to use it. Just because I don't even know how to say it.
So, Brandon, what is the name that we've kind of settled on?
So, I think, especially with the pelt color being what it is, I think we both kind of agreed that Takani would be the name that we would select for our character. So, we have the main character's Takani. And honestly, it's a very gender neutral name. So, it could go either way. I think we both kind of are in the realm of, I think we'll go female character. Even though it could easily go each whatever way we wanted. Which for me, I mean, my two main characters in my story are both female. It doesn't mean because we're males that we have to choose a male character. Like we were kind of going through the list of different names. Like half of them were more suited for a male name, and half of them were more female. So it'll probably be a female.
But it does leave the door open if we decide, as we're working on the story, that, oh, this character is better suited to be a male. Whereas if you went with something along the lines of Kaya, and you get halfway through the story and you're like, I think it should be male. At that point, what do you do?
Which, honestly,
search to replace.
There are names that Kaya is male or masculine, so I'm like, that could go either way.
But
I'm thinking of Genshin Impact, for example, Kaya.
Sure.
Spelled a little bit differently, but I'm assuming they may have even taken inspiration from what it meant. But anyways, I digress. Obviously, some of the conflict is one of the things that was under the character creation thing that we had the last video. Some of the conflict is not just physical, but emotional, or I guess you could maybe say spiritual. But
that's kind of again where
it's all in the mind. So it obviously you have your conflict of you're trying to survive in the physical, like literally trying to survive. But in the other aspect, you have this sense of like survivor's guilt kind of esque thing that's also happening in the mind.
Which again, I'm excited to tackle because in my own story, outside of this, one of the main dilemmas that the main character suffers from is survivor's guilt. And so there is a huge aspect of the mind and kind of warfare within the mind and your own emotions. So it's something that I say excited to write, but take that as you will. It's something I'm comfortable writing about.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that works as we get into writing.
And I think like one of the things we almost want to like talk about is kind of that gradual maturity. So obviously you have like character arcs and different things. It's really tough to do necessarily in a short story, especially with all the grandiose things that we can think of for different things, because honestly we could probably make a ginormous book out of something simple like this.
Well, and I guess the question remains, how long is the story going to be? And we'll get
the idea is short story. Now, how short is a short story?
And that depends on that's kind of what I'm getting at. You've got some short stories that are 5 pages, some that are 40, and then you've got your novellas, which are 100. Who knows? Nobody knows.
It's probably not going to be that long. but
well, Brandon, you never know.
no, it'll definitely be a couple of chapters. Because the idea behind at least what we have currently thinking is we're kind of doing a back and forth. So you have something happening in the real, you go into the mind, and you kind of relive it.
Mm-hmm.
You go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until at some point they kind of align.
And that's something that, as we continue along this journey, we're going to discuss. Well, what's happening in the physical? How is that going to affect the mental? So that we kind of stay on track and we don't go completely off the walls. But
yeah, and what's the end goal? Like, what's the end goal? Well, I mean, obviously, you have if the plot is indeed survival. What's the end goal? Well, to survive. Well, duh. But like, where's a good stopping point?
Sure.
Where is some of that? Like, obviously, I think of the Hatchet as different things for like what's a survival look like. Obviously, in the Hatchet, the character's trying to get back to civilization.
Well, and I even go back to the idea of, oh, well, they're comfortable in their own skin. Survival is going to be intrinsically difficult with
Being
a pelt
alone.
that, yes, well, not only just being alone, but with a pelt that doesn't lend itself towards being able to survive in that setting. And so it could be the end point is the character Takani becomes comfortable with this is how I'm going to survive in this new reality that I'm forced, to engage with. Who knows? I don't know.
Or even like moving to a different location.
It could be that as well.
I'm kind of almost leaning to move to a different location to kind of like take yourself away from the past in a way that I'm not bound by it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I am forging my own path forward. And maybe the end is you find, quote unquote, that civilization of you find other Fox, whatever, and you're not alone anymore. That kind of thing. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
We'll wing it. Well, not wing it. There's preparation, but
I hope this is somewhat of a good opportunity to kind of get some of our thoughts and ideas as we kind of unpack some of these episodes. Because I know like some of the episodes go a little bit longer than we want to sometimes. And I think it's really important to kind of get through our own thoughts just so you have an idea of kind of some of the things that we're talking about and talking through.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously some of the things that we're thinking of for like character development. So obviously you have all the physical attributes like eye color and all that kind of stuff. Those are important, yes. But some of the difficult ones like, oh, what's their flaws? What's their personality? What's some of those things? Like that's some of the things that we'll unpack. And we're kind of going through, again, some of this is kind of relating to plot, but a lot of it all kind of ties together. And once you kind of have all these big three things together, you really start to flesh out kind of an idea of a story.
Yeah.
Like these are the big three things, I think, which is plot, the world, and the character or characters. Obviously, it's a little bit more simplistic. We basically only have one character that we're focusing in on. Not that we won't interact with other things outside of that. Because there'll be a polar bear interaction.
Right, but the character who is going to receive the development and the arc there is one of them.
Yes.
So, you're not going to be, here's 20 character arcs that we're going to have to develop over the course of the short story.
Which I think helps in the terms of what we're kind of going through. Like, this is how you write a character. And can actually help us kind of delve into different aspects of it. So like in the mind or in the physical, like just different aspects. And hopefully like once we like actually get through and publish this thing that people will be able to read it and kind of learn from it, but also enjoy it as well. Mm-hmm. And kind of enjoy the process as we talk about it on the Inklings as well. Because I would say it's a challenge, but it's a fun challenge. Not just because we're writers, but because it gets you thinking, it gets you to be able to place yourself into different situations. Like, oh, what can I do if this happens? It's to get some of those creative juices flowing. And hopefully this can be a help or a Kickstarter to some of the stories that you might create. Or maybe if you're in class or something like that and you're asking, oh, what can I do for like an assignment if I have to do like a short story or a poem or something? Like some of these things can maybe be a help to you.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, those are just our rambling thoughts. And
Hopefully
Oh.
next week we'll have
Yeah.
something a little longer, but we felt it was important considering how complicated the nature of plot is.
'Cause
We wanted to
I-
spend more time on it.
yeah, honestly, like plot is kind of hard to define,
Mm-hmm.
especially for when it's like you think of it almost second nature to us. Like, oh, when you're thinking of world building and everything, like even the theme that I had for like the world building was plot.
Yeah.
So, or like in that ballpark, it kind of lends you into a direction of plot.
Sure.
So, yeah, plot is one of the big features that are in a story and a very pivotal one. Because without the plot, you don't really have much of a story.
But it's also one of those things that 9 times out of 10, as much as planning as you do, it's going to change as you start writing. And it's just going to be something that's kind of naturally flows. I mean, with, characters, that's not to say their arcs don't change and alter as the story goes either, but you've got something a little more solidified with a character, at least a starting point. Whereas plot, it can go any which way. At least that's how it's been in my experience.
But we'll get into that, and then the episodes that we'll do after some of that is, I think, at least something I'm planning on, is I want to do something about starting.
Mm-hmm.
So starting to write. What's the introduction or whatever, the prologue or whatever you want to call it. How do you start?
Yeah.
And I eventually will get to a point, whenever that is, I don't know, but how do you end?
And then hopefully around those same times, again, who knows with scheduling and all of that, but it'd be cool that if we could share, this is the start of the story. This is where we're at in the actual writing process.
And I was thinking, even, I don't know exactly how to do it with the current setup I have, but even writing out and typing in kind of our things as we're doing it, and we can maybe do it on our phones. Like I can pull up a document that we're working on, like literally document, and we can start out with different starting phrases or different ideas. And you kind of see some of that writing. Obviously, I'm not the greatest on typing on my phone. I'd rather use my computer. But just to get an idea of some of how it starts, I think would be awesome. And then eventually, I think it would be awesome to get kind of a look into what does it look like to publish, which I've never actually personally did. I know there's different avenues you can do. You can self-publish, you can do other things, post it online, or go to an actual, get a hard copy, different things like that. But anyway, that's just our little short little recap on the last 2 weeks. So we'll catch you next week on Plot.
Adios.
See ya.